Washington's stated case for military action against Iran centers on nuclear weapons and regional security. 13 months before hostilities began, the White House signed a publicly available directive. It names a different objective entirely. Both documents are in the public record. Almost no one has covered them together. The US government's public rationale for military action against Iran is documented and consistent. Iran, the administration argued, was months away from a nuclear weapon. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors reported in late 2025 that Tehran had stockpiled enough enriched uranium for multiple warheads. The IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has been designated a foreign terrorist organization since 2019. It has been linked to attacks on American troops across Iraq and Syria. Iran-backed groups including Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas had destabilized the region for decades. The October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel left unresolved business in both Washington and Jerusalem. These justifications are real. Administration officials have made them publicly, repeatedly, and in detail. On February 4, 2025, 13 months before the first US bomb fell on Tehran, President Trump signed a document that made many of these outcomes predictable. That document, called National Security Presidential Memorandum 2, NSPM 2, ordered the full weight of the US government to drive Iran's export of oil to zero, including exports of Iranian crude to the People's Republic of China. The wording is explicit. Iran was the target. Cutting off China's oil was a named goal. NSPM 2 was not classified. It was published online, announced at a press conference, and summarized in a White House fact sheet that anyone can read today. What is striking is how rarely that strategic objective has been connected, in mainstream coverage, to what closing the Strait of Hormuz has actually accomplished. NSPM 2 named cutting off China's oil as a stated US objective. NSPM 2 was published publicly the same day it was signed. Its stated goals went beyond nuclear containment. The memorandum directed the administration to pursue maximum economic pressure on Iran and explicitly named China as a target of that pressure. Agencies were ordered to eliminate the ability of Iran to sell oil, petrochemical products, and natural gas, including crude destined for Chinese buyers. The Center for Strategic and International Studies noted in May 2025 that it showed the administration losing patience with the largely uninterrupted flow of oil from Iran to China, especially at this time when seeking maximum leverage against Beijing. That assessment appeared months before a shot was fired. At the time, roughly 80% of Iran's oil exports, close to 1.5 million barrels per day, were flowing to China according to cargo tracking firm Vortexa. Before examining the economic consequences, one fact deserves its own space. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz as a war measure. Iranian forces mined and blockaded the strait. The United States did not unilaterally close it. This distinction matters for any causal argument. If the administration wanted to cut China's oil supply, it did not choose the method. It chose a military campaign that produced a closure Iran then executed. Whether that outcome was anticipated, welcomed, or incidental is a question the public record does not answer. It is a question worth asking. What the documents show is that cutting China's oil was a named US goal 13 months before the war began. What followed achieved that goal. The gap between those two facts is where the honest analysis has to live. A reasonable question. What evidence would actually resolve whether the energy competition outcome was planned or coincidental? Evidence pointing toward intent would include internal administration documents discussing Hormuz disruption as a strategic tool, pre-war modeling of Chinese oil stockpile drawdown timelines, or communications showing coordination between the nuclear justification and the energy pressure track. None of that is in the public record. Evidence pointing toward coincidence would include decision records showing the military campaign was designed on a strictly non-proliferation basis, with no internal discussion of Chinese energy exposure. That is also not in the public record. What is in the record is this: the administration wrote down that it wanted to cut China's oil supply. Then a war began, then China's oil supply was cut. Causation is not established. Before its closure on February 28, 2026, approximately 20 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That is roughly 20% of all oil shipped by sea worldwide. The Congressional Research Service, in a March 2026 report published on Congress.gov, calculated that 84% of that crude was headed for Asian markets. China was receiving about a third of its total oil supply through that route. The CRS report is publicly available. It has received almost no coverage in the context of the broader US-China competition that NSPM2 explicitly describes. China saw trouble coming. Between January and February 2026, Chinese oil imports surged 15.8% compared to the year before as Beijing rushed to stockpile. Iranian shipments to China hit a record 3.78 million barrels per day in the week of February 16. That was more than double the usual weekly volume. The Bruegel Institute calculated China was importing up to 5.4 million barrels per day through the Strait before its closure. The preparation bought time, but the math is difficult. Gabriel Collins at Rice University's Baker Institute estimates China has roughly 60 to 90 days of practical cover before its refineries are forced to cut back. Chinese entities held approximately 1.2 to 1.4 billion barrels in total storage as of March 2026. Throughout 2025, the US. During the crisis, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly presented a plan for an overland pipeline routing Gulf oil from Saudi Arabia's Yanbu port across the Negev desert to Israel's Eilat port, then onward to Mediterranean shipping lanes. He said it could be built in 3 years. The economic logic is straightforward. Gulf oil routed overland to Mediterranean ports would be cheaper for European buyers and more expensive for Asian ones. It would permanently shift global energy flows away from China and toward US-aligned markets. The Strait of Hormuz would become optional for Western-aligned nations. For Beijing, it would remain essential. Whether the proposal is a serious post-conflict infrastructure plan or a negotiating position remains unclear. It has not been formally advanced by any government. What is on the record is that it was made publicly. Beijing responded on several fronts. China negotiated a limited arrangement with Iran early in March, under which Iranian forces would allow ships signaling Chinese ownership to transit the strait. Beijing also redirected supply through Russia and Kazakhstan. India and China are now competing for the same Russian crude. Kepler shipping analyst Muyu Su described that contest to CNBC as intense and ongoing. Russia increased oil exports to China by roughly 300,000 additional barrels per day in January and February. But the Bruegel Institute calculated that Russian pipelines are far from sufficient to replace the 5.4 million barrels per day China was importing through the strait. No pipeline that could replace that volume currently exists. None could be built on a timeline that matters. None of the information in this piece is classified. None of it requires inference beyond what the cited sources directly state. NSPM2 named cutting off China's oil as a US strategic objective 13 months before the war began. The Strait of Hormuz closure achieved that objective. Both facts are in the public record. The official security justifications are also in the public record, and they are real. IAEA reports document Iran's nuclear enrichment. US Treasury and State Department records document IRGC operations and terrorism links. These are not fabrications invented after the fact. That's the story. For the full article, sources, and more news that matters, visit noproblemnews.com. noproblemnews.com, keeping you informed.